Yeah, just in case.
No. I'm very confident.
Right, so welcome everybody, and welcome to this the policy Q&A with the Mayor today. If I just take, we do a series of introductions, because you're quite right, Mayor, there are some new faces in the scrutiny committee now. So if we do a quick round of introductions, please, and we'll start down in the corner with Councillor Tennant.
Morning, Jamie Tennant, Councillor Evans. Yes, lovely.
Nigel Lumby, Councillor in Shropshire, all right.
Lovely.
Lauren Rainbow, Councillor for Birmingham City Council.
Yeah.
Vera Waters, Councillor for Walsall.
Mike Sutherland, Councillor for Cannock Chase Council.
Ah, lovely.
Ian Kettle, Metropolitan Borough of Dudley.
Martin McCarthy, Solihull, Metropolitan Borough Council.
Andrew Burrows, Solihull as well.
Mike Smith, Chair of ARAC, here in an observing capacity.
And everyone knows Laura as well, I presume. Needs no introduction. You've already done it, have you?
No, I haven't, but I was here on Monday, so I got to meet almost everybody.
Lovely.
Councillor Cathy Bateson, Association of Black Country Authorities and Chair of this committee.
Lindsay Roberts, Scrutiny Officer for the Combined Authority.
Kate Taylor, Head of Finance Business Partnering and Strategic Planning for the Combined Authority.
Dan Essex, Government Services Manager.
Okay, and on screen we've got Councillor Akhtar, who is the Vice Chair of this committee, but he's unable to be here in person.
Good morning, Councillor Akhtar. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Okay, so if we can take apologies for absence, please.
Yes, Chair. Apologies received from Councillor Chalk, Councillor Fenton, Councillor Sweet and Amanda Tomlinson.
That unfortunately means that we are not quorate by one, which is a pity. But you know, these things happen. So apologies for that. We are 10 rather than 11 in the room. And the quorum has to be those of us in the room. So never mind. Okay, so do I have any declarations of interest? And members are reminded of the need to declare any disclosable prejudicial interests they have in any item being discussed during the course of the meeting. And in addition, the receipt of any gift or hospitality should be declared where the value is thought to have exceeded £25 gifts or £40 hospitality. I'm not seeing any indications on that. If I can just give a couple of reminders. Firstly, we are being recorded, so this will go out on YouTube later. Secondly, can we use the mics because it helps with the recording, otherwise it can be a bit faint. And thirdly, members have all received an aid memoir in advance of today's meeting. They are not strictly scripted questions that you must stick to with the Mayor. So please feel free, if somebody asks a question, the Mayor gives you an answer, please feel free, if you've got supplementary to that you feel you want to explore a bit further, to jump in and do just that. So I will now be quiet and hand over to the Mayor for his opening statement.
Thank you very much to the Chair. And just to reiterate what the Chair just said in the last bit there, we've been doing this for a few years now. I genuinely enjoy it. So, and we get the most out of it if we do have a discussion, actually. So if something happens that you feel you want to sort of run with the ball on, please do. That will be the best way of doing it. I've been asked just to say a little bit at the beginning, but I've learned over the years to be brief because the fun is the questions, about really the role and what the priorities are. So I'll try to explain that in my few remarks at the beginning. So obviously we're having this discussion today and it will be about good governance, of course, but we all know that the backdrop to it is really an incredible difficult one for our citizens. And I draw that out because it's not our role to sit and comment on it today. But obviously, I think what is really important we do against that backdrop is be really clear where we have a responsibility, where we can make a difference for citizens, and frankly, where we can't. And I think that should be that sort of whole spirit of honesty around that should perhaps govern our piece then. I will try certainly to do that. And I am very clear, and Laura will confirm, I'm always saying to the executive, given that very, very difficult backdrop, us actually getting on and delivering driving out results and showing real progress and change is even more important for our citizens. And you'll all in different ways have been taking your feedback from your residents. I genuinely think at a time where national government can look to be very unstable, actually it is doubly more important that we're seen to be getting on with our jobs in a very practical way, actually. So hopefully that will govern. Now, in terms of, and the chair asked me to do this because there's a number of new members, so it might be helpful. In terms of what I actually do, and when people ask you to do that, you think, oh God, that's a difficult question to answer, more difficult than else. I hope this will be helpful to you because I've tried to draw it into sort of 4 themes, and I'll perhaps then give you some examples of what actually then goes in the diary to do these things. But I think these are perhaps the 4 most important themes of what I have to do. And the first thing, and in most of the press releases we do, it always says this, Andy is the chair of the combined authority. So let's just spend a little moment on that because it might sound really boring, but I think there's a very important point around it actually, which I think members of this committee will really understand. It is my role ultimately to convene the political leadership across the region, make sure that we get to good, clear decisions and that they are then implemented through the officers, and then we review how we are doing. And the way I have tried to approach this throughout is there must be very good quality governance. There must be no question of what has been decided. And actually, wherever we can, is we get to a united position across the region. And this is a surprising thing to say, but it's something I feel very strongly about. I'm actually very proud that all of the financial decisions that have been taken by this organisation over the last 5 years have actually been taken in a cross-party way. It doesn't mean everyone necessarily agrees along the way, but it does mean that when we get to the board, we have always managed to get to an agreement. And I think that is a very positive way of going about it, because what it also has then meant is there has never been any debate about what was being decided. Are people on board for it or not? Do they then try to sabotage the decision that's been taken? We have never had any of that. And I do see it as my ultimate responsibility, with the support of the executive, to just run that good process. Second thing is around what I would describe as setting and executing the regional strategy. Now, let's just be really clear here. That does not mean I want to be responsible for the strategy on the things that each of your local authorities do. The key in this is about the regional strategy. So Dudley is still doing its dust cards, Solihull is doing its social care, But there are a relatively small number of things that are best done at a regional level. That was the origin of the combined authority in the first place. And it is our responsibility ultimately to lay out what that strategy is. Be honest, you do that partly at the ballot box with the manifesto, and then the executive have to implement it. And you also do it through the annual planning of the combined authority, which comes to the board once a year in the summer. So you lay out and then execute that strategy. And the key areas of that, of course, are first of all the economic plan for the region. And we may talk this morning about the plan for growth. That's the work we launched this summer, responding to the pandemic, talking about the sort of cluster approach. And then, of course, it's about all of the sort of ingredients that go into that around, the boring language would be the supply side, around transport, housing and skills, where we have specific formal responsibility in the devolution deal. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions about how ex-transport runs. That is formalised in that, but I see it as contributing to the overall economic performance of the region. And then there are those areas that it's been agreed that the mayor has an informal role. Wasn't in the original devolution deal, isn't formally in my job description, but one of the things I'm sure we will touch on as the morning goes through, the power of this role is sometimes in the soft power, the bringing people together. A really good example of that would be where we have then developed a response, a direct executive responsibility would be in the area of homelessness, where you convene people together, even though it wasn't in that formal first piece. Then the next part of the job, I should have said how I spend a lot of my time on that. The way this is actually done is through the officers of the CA. So I would sit down with Laura once a week, with Julie Nugent as our Director of Skills, with Gareth as Director of Housing Elements, and working with them on how our plans are implemented. So that's the sort of the executive piece. Now, the next side of the role, and it's again very difficult to be precise about this, is this whole issue of government liaison. I think right back to when the mayors were created, this idea of one single point of interface with government really is, I think, as it's worked out, important. And so I would spend a fair time, maybe a day a week, in London, formally meeting government ministers and their officers, and a lot of informal things, just again to bring it to life. Yesterday, the Secretary of State for Transport rang me up and said, we'll be introducing in the Commons tomorrow the bill around minimum standards during strike periods. Now, it's not for me to tell her whether that's right politically or not, but she's saying this will have a direct impact on you. I want you to know. And so, and in other stages, I'll be saying to her, and I then said to her, that's great, Anne-Marie, but I'm telling you, I want to come and see you in 6 weeks' time, because the next big thing for us is Midland Rail Hub, and I want the money from you. So I hope it's a practical example of how that direct interface occurs with the government. And I think as the role has gone on, that's become really quite an important piece of it. Another really practical example of that, I'm sure we may talk about today, the investment zone piece, which you saw on Tuesday. We put our formal bids in, worked with all your local authorities. That actually started with me being summoned by the Secretary of State, Simon Clarke, to say, this is what we're thinking of, this is what we wanted to do, where's your input? So that's quite an important bit. And then the last part of it is what you might call the representative side. And again, this isn't formalised in any job description, but there's a number of things where, as the sort of leader of the region, you just step forward and think, I'm going to sort of occupy that space. And a really good example of that would be, if you think of all the press that happened around the Commonwealth Games. Yes, Ian Ward quite rightly did a load of it himself, quite rightly, but equally they sort of turned to me as the sort of spokesman for the region. And if I think then following that one up, the whole debate about how we captured the cash around the underspend around the Commonwealth Games budget, that too, that sort of, it falls to you as the representative to do that. And then the softer part of that sort of representative piece, some of which can be with the communities. If I think last Saturday we had the Diwali on the Square thing, I couldn't go, but had I been fit, again, that's the type of thing you step into. So hopefully that, and another really good example of that coming up again to make it practical, 2 weeks' time, we've got the trade delegation to India. That's about 8 days out in the market. I will be formally leading that as the sort of representative piece. So I hope, Madam Chair, that gives you a feel of what it's about and might lead into areas of question.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Mayor. So before we move into the kind of discussion that we've done a little bit of work on, does anybody have any burning issues that they'd like to pull out from the Mayor's opening statement? Stunned everybody into silence there.
But hopefully some of you recognise some of it as well. Can I be really cheeky at this point, Madam Chair? I don't mind when in the meeting at all, but I hope there is a question at some point. And if there's not, I'm going to just jump in with it on the subject of the funding for the metro in Dudley. Because obviously, quite rightly, there was transport scrutiny last week. And I think there was just a little bit of confusion at the end of it in terms of how the meeting is reported. I'm doing to make sure that we understand that correctly. And I expect Councillor Kettle may be going to ask me about that anyway. But if you don't mind, I just want to flag early on that at some point I'd like to be able to mention.
Rest assured, there is a question on it for you.
Lovely. Okay, excellent.
Okay, so I'd like to hand over first to Councillor Rainbow, who got some questions around the cost of living.
Yeah. I was really pleased to see you speaking about the cost of living and the wider sort of economic hardship that people are really facing at the moment across the region. I suppose one of my questions really are, do you regret so publicly backing Liz Truss, given that her economic policies have seen our sort of our region will be feeling the impact, the budgetary consequences of her policies? It's going to fall to the combined authority, it's going to fall to the local authorities. Yeah, but just keen to get your thoughts.
Yeah, that's very fair. I hope what people have learnt about me, I'll try to be as honest as I can. So the honest answer to your question is I don't regret backing her, but I do regret how some of the things have worked out over the last 6 weeks. Because it didn't need to be like this. So some of the things that are really acutely around cost of living would have happened whoever was Prime Minister. I think you all accept that, but let's just get it very clearly on the face. The increase in energy prices was happening well before she was elected as Prime Minister. I do believe that what she has done in terms of the energy support, both for individuals and importantly for small businesses, and it wasn't clear during the leadership campaign of getting support for small businesses. It's something I lobbied on very hard when I saw her in the campaign publicly. I do think they have actually acted decisively to address that. We do know that it's only for 6 months, and clearly there's a very legitimate question about whether it's going to come, whether that can be sustained. But that, I think, has actually been done well. The bit that I have a regret about is that even though, of course, it's true that interest rates are going up globally, if we were sitting in the US or France or Germany, they're all facing the same situation. It is definitely true that the failure to manage the markets at the mini budget has aggravated what is a national peace. And I think on the word regret, that is where the regret is focused. Now, obviously, I am a huge believer in Jeremy Hunt. He was my first choice for leader of the party. I voted for him 3 years ago. I know him well. I think he's a really high-class cabinet member. So I'm very pleased that he's now in that role, and we must all fervently hope, for the sake, frankly, of mortgage payers and everybody else, that he is able in the next 2 weeks to bring forward a national budget that calms the markets and begins to turn that interest rate down, because that, as your question draws out, has a direct effect on the well-being of people in this region. So I think that's what's now at stake. That's the honest answer to the regret question.
Just moving that on a little bit, is there anything within the remit of the combined authority that you feel you are able to, could, in terms of the cost of living crisis that is being experienced immediately within the region? Is there anything that is within the remit of the combined authority to be working on?
Most definitely. So the first thing is not quite remit of the CA, but again, let's just, given what I've said about the role, let's just be clear. I do think this whole piece about making it clear that small businesses had a really important impact around energy, and me inserting myself at the crucial moment with the leadership of the government there was an important role to play. I'm not in any way saying I did it on my own, but I am dead sure that my voice was amongst those who moved that along. But what you mean by the question is much more about what happens immediately over there. And I think there's 3 answers to it. Actually, there's probably 4. The first is our responsibility around transport, where we have a direct cause and effect here. And I think we have actually done a good job on the whole question of transport fares. It's worth about £200, £250 per year to the average commuter, the decision that's been taken with National Express on fares. And we are the only part of the country to have managed to reduce our fares in that way. Now, okay, £250 is dwarfed by your energy bill, but it is still a really useful contribution. And I'm actually pleased that we uniquely have been able to do that with our operator. And that wasn't easy. That takes a lot of negotiation by the team, and was all tied up with how we chose to use our bus service improvement money. So there is definite evidence that we have done a good thing there. The second thing, where we have a direct effect, and I hope our local authority colleagues would agree with this, we could have imposed a number of taxes to deal with our own financial situation. We have chosen not to do so. So whether they be the direct precept, which every year the leaders and I go around this, and this year the conversation was very clear. If ever there was a wrong time to do it, this would be it. But again, we've taken an active decision, and I think it's the right decision. I know it's been politically contentious back in 2018, but I can honestly say that this time it was unanimous amongst everybody that it would be the wrong time to do it. The third thing is obviously what we can do over energy efficiency. Now, this is not an immediate benefit around cost of. It's the most important thing to deal with. So the work that is being done around retrofitting to begin to develop that industry. There'll be about 1,000 homes retrofitted this winter across the combined authority. Scheme in Dudley, scheme in Birmingham, scheme in Solihull, scheme in Coventry. And we have been the sort of focal point of the bid to government for that cash. Now, you'll all say it's only 1,000, Andy. It needs to be a damn sight more. And of course, I agree with that. But we are getting a capability in this, and there are many more bids into government for further funding around that. And then I think the fourth one, where we have been unsuccessful so far, and it's not for the want of trying, I am very clear that the local authorities all have a much bigger role in terms of direct support for the vulnerable at times like this. And what we have put in every one of our bids into government for our own funding has been the talk about the sustainability of local government funding. So we've stood up and made our voice heard on that. Like everywhere else, it has not yet been successful, but as I say, that isn't for the want of trying on our part.
Thanks very much. Does anybody have any supplementaries they want to come in on with that? Councillor Tennant?
You mentioned local government funding, which is obviously absolutely crucial. Household support funding that we're in Birmingham, we've had to top up from our reserves. It's already run out, and we are facing more cuts. So just wondering, you mentioned you had lobbied on it. How many times have you lobbied on it? Because like you said, local authorities are on the front line with cost of living crisis.
Every single time we've put in a budget proposal, a devolution proposal, it is always in there. So it has been repeated is the answer. And to be fair to the leaders of the local authorities, and Laura will confirm this, they are always consistent in saying it must go in, because I'm very clear. We will only be as effective in many things as our local authorities are capable of delivering. So there's you don't have to convince me. There's a bond there.
Thanks very much. And kind of continuing with that sort of theme around the challenges of the things that you're lobbying for, and then the things that we might receive. And I think this is something that came out very strongly in our Trailblazer devolution deal meetings, and we picked it up last week with Ian Ward, is ambition versus resource. And it's, you know, the CA has quite a wide-ranging ambition that we've seen as part of the devolution deal, you know, moving into other spheres, you know, sort of like health, working with health. What we were concerned about was the resource, would the resource match the ambition? And given, and as I say, some of these questions that we talked about last week, actually, things have moved on and changed again since we talked about them. So what's your feeling about the ambition versus the resource, and how are you going to bridge that gap?
It's a great question, thank you. I think there's probably, when people say this, you all go, oh God, there's three things that need to be said here, because they're slightly different. My first response is there is absolutely nothing wrong to have a really stretching ambition, even if you don't know right now how it is all going to be made to happen. Because just like any corporation, you have to know what the big picture is, where you want to get to. And if I look back over the last 5 years, lots of things we talked about 5 years ago, we didn't know how they were going to happen. And lo and behold, you now look and we have managed to colour them in. So, you know, this is never going to be the perfect game that we can see the way of doing every implementation right now. It's right to have the difference between long-term goal and actual short-term delivery. Second thing to say is where I think the debate with Councillor Ward was around this was particularly around capital costs where in the transport field. I think that's where this question of ambition really came out. And it is true that we have a particular issue there at the moment because of and it's a worldwide issue, again, not trying to make an excuse, but it's true, where the inflation aspects of the capital programmes are leaving budgets that we thought were quite insufficient at the moment. And we might want to pick up some examples. So that is a systemic issue that the combined authority faces. Thus far, actually, we've done pretty well where there have been individual schemes with problems of being able to go back to our finances and fill them in. But it is a fair cop that issue exists generally. And then the third way of taking your question is perhaps where it fits with the Trailblazer devolution deal. I am very clear that it would be very easy for the combined authority to say to government, yes, we'll take that on without the resources to do it. And that would be folly. If you look back at the last 5 years, the areas where we've done well is where we've had clear responsibility, clear executive leadership and political support for that, and actually the resources to make it happen. So what we do not want from this Trailblazer devolution deal, and it's my sort of advice to our negotiators, is we don't want to be given a sort of half sop and then not have the resources to follow through, because we just end up disappointing everyone if we do that.
And I think that's really important to hear that, because I think that was some of the issues that we felt we were in potentially in that sphere.
I think it's a very fair call out, actually, and we might all be drunk on it in the short term if they said that, but it wouldn't lead to good outcomes. And it goes back to the core point. We have, what I said in the very first thing in my introduction, we have to know what we're doing, what we're not doing, and we have to set ourselves up for success. So we mustn't be sort of, what's the word? We mustn't have eyes bigger than our tummies when it comes to the negotiation coming up in government.
Thank you. That's very clear. Yeah. There's something that you touched on in your Ian. Did you want to come in on that? You're looking.
When you finish, Kathy,
yeah. Carry on.
Thank you. Andy, part of your initiative in the last 12 months has been the homelessness.
Yes.
And part of the parcel of economic pressures are applying to more and more people on our streets.
Yeah.
We had an interesting meeting about 12 months ago with Birmingham Council, who had a special organisation within the homelessness initiative where professional beggars were a problem. Now, we've had this over in Stourbridge and Dudley, where 3 out of the 4 regular beggars in the town go home at night. One calls in a taxi at 7 o'clock and goes home in a taxi. So, when you start talking about homelessness and professional beggars, you eat a part of the law, in my opinion, that ought to be applied. But I commend your work on the homelessness. Is there any scope for improving on the homelessness issue?
And I mustn't say this too often this morning because you'll get bored. I think, again, that question can be taken in 2 ways, Ian. So let me try to explain what I mean. First of all, you are right. There is a huge difference between people who are genuinely at risk of homelessness, of being homeless, where we must be incredibly compassionate, and I know everyone in the room would share that, and where there is actually a legal issue about aggressive begging in some of our town and city centres. They are different things and need to be treated very differently. So the premise of your question is entirely fair, and actually there is a policing issue around the aggressive begging piece, and actually the work in Birmingham City Centre to extend the, I'm going to forget the exact term for the 2 Birmingham councillors will know, to extend the, what's the zone called in the city centre? Peace, I can't remember. Never mind, you know what I'm trying to refer to, those letters. But anyway, never mind. But let's get to the core of it. So the premise is right. Now, then why I say there's 2 issues is that the most successful thing that we've done around homelessness is, of course, addressing the rough sleeping numbers. And there is no question that rough sleeping levels are much lower across the whole region than they were. Actually, the peak was in 2018. And the project that's been particularly successful has, of course, been Housing First. And we recently had the funding confirmed for 2 further years extension of that. And if I'm honest, that was a real worry, because had we not, the progress that we've made may have been pushed back. That's good. The question is, there is an underlying issue here, which is very much to do with the sufficient supply of affordable and social homes. And we have not made enough progress as a region on this. And I think this is, again, where we come together across party. And one of the things, and it's probably the second most important thing of all in the Trailblazer devolution deal, that we're saying to government, we do need further funding devolved to us around this affordable homes and social homes funding. They have it in London, we do not. I do not see, no other area outside London has it, I do not see how that can be right. We've clearly got demonstrable capability in this area and we need to be trusted to do it. So it's one of the key lobbying points. And obviously that's much more about the upstream piece because we've done a decent job at dealing with the most severe presenting issue. And again, all credit to all the local authorities who've stepped into that.
Thank you. You referred to this in your opening statement there about the investment zones.
Yes.
So we've now got a couple of questions on investment zones. So if I hand over to Councillor Akhtar on the screen.
Thank you, Chair. And first of all, sorry for not being able to personally be in the room due to personal commitment. And also, I'm away from my desktop and I'm using my mobile to access this meeting. And forgive me if my call drops. Andy, given the political turmoil in the Westminster and uncertainty around the government, the investment zone, which was announced by the previous Chancellor, because we had 4 or 5 in the last couple of months, now we got uncertainty around it. And I'm aware of that. The you, on behalf of the region, expressed interest for investment zone at Old Coventry Airport for the West Midland Gigafactory. Can you please tell us that what will happen now to those investment zones, and also what is the future of the West Midland Gigafactory? Because it's gone through all the planning and everything, but still there is no commitment from the government to appoint a company actually who will run the West Midland Gigafactory. Can you please tell us a bit more about this?
Yeah,
Thank you, Chair.
Very important question, because obviously this goes to the heart of one of the sectors that we are really strong in and is changing with new technology, so to the automotive and the electrification. That's a real pleasure. So you are right that the investment zone proposal was launched by Kwasi Kwarteng as Chancellor, but it was very much supported by the Prime Minister and importantly by Simon Clarke, who's Secretary of State for Levelling Up. And I believe, and you can all look into my eyes, can I say more than that? I can't know for certain, but I believe that it will definitely survive Kwasi Kwarteng's departure. And that's why we have submitted, I say we, it's the combined authority with all of the constituent authorities have submitted our proposals for the zones. They're currently being assessed by government and they're talking about assessing them within 2 weeks' time. What I do not know, and again, this is in the spirit of honesty, I do not know how many they will select because that's where there may be debate in government. But to be clear, we're very confident of all of our proposals, and the Coventry Gigafactory site is, I think, a really, bullseye one, because it is so critical to a much wider agenda. So I'm very confident of that proposal. Now, in terms of the wider question about the Gigafactory, yes, you are right. It has not yet had an occupier, an operator, you might call it. To be clear, the government cannot make it happen on its own. We have to get a private sector company to do that. The search for that company goes on. The government's job will be to subsidise that company when it comes forward. And very clearly, they've said that there is £1 billion available to support this industry. Can't expect it all to go to our Gigafactory, but I am comfortable that there is a pot there from which the subsidy will come. And we have, therefore, to find the private sector investor. Do you want me to say what will happen? This will come right in time. Might not be a particular investor, but the opportunity is too good, and I'm very confident it will eventually come right. Hopefully that's clear.
Can I come back, Chair?
Oh, yeah, of course you can.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, with all respect, Andy, there's nothing new in the response. But I understand that there will be an operator at the end of the day to run that Gigafactory. But I think we do need a political will, and that political will sit with the Conservative Prime Minister or Conservative Party, actually, to declare that they are willing to do this project at Coventry Airport site. And this is what public wants to know and hear.
So,
thank you, Chair.
So let's just be really clear. The Prime Minister has given that public commitment. And during the Conservative leadership election, I made sure that that commitment was made public. She wrote about this in some newspaper articles. She also answered questions on the hustings around it, and the exact words was she would ensure the quote unquote the full weight of the government was put behind the Coventry Gigafactory proposal. So I do think we have that commitment, but the way it actually turns into reality, and I know this is frustrating for somebody, is the truth. A private sector business has actually got to come forward with the proposal, and the people who are promoting this proposal to the landowner, Coventry City Council, myself, everybody else, we've got to woo that private sector investor, but ultimately they've got to make the application to the government to say, we now want that subsidy. And what we have is the Prime Minister on record saying, yes, we will be committed to it.
Councillor Tennant? Sorry, did you want to come back in, Councillor Akram?
Chair, if you allow me, if I can ask my second question around the transport, because I'm using my phone and I don't know how long this is going to last. If you allow me to ask the question around the transport.
Can I just finish off on Councillor Tennant's question around the Gigafactory and the investment zone before we come on to transport?
Okay, that's fair enough. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Tennant.
So yes, I had a couple of questions around investment zones, not specifically around the Gigafactory. So there's, we're still in negotiation stage and we don't know exactly what these are going to look like. The old levelling up zones, which we talked about before the leadership election, came with potential funding. Do you know if these investment zones will? And they largely seem to be focused around deregulation. In your negotiations with government, do you have kind of any red lines around planning regs, but most crucially around environmental regs?
Yeah. Okay, really good question. So they definitely come with funding. Let me explain what I mean by that. And perhaps it's worth saying, in all the discussions I've had with government, I usually start off with, in Birmingham, we have the most successful enterprise zone in the country, in the city centre, and everyone's enjoyed seeing the remodelling of Paradise Circus. That would not have happened without the enterprise zone status in 2013. And what you learn from that is that the funding mechanism that the zone allowed was to invest up front, to change all of the infrastructure, so that then the private sector investors came into a completely remodeled place. And what you might need to do in different sites might be different. What you need to do in East Birmingham is different to what you need to do in Dudley, is different to what you need to do in the Gigafactory site. But the common factor is that the financial model has got to let you make the investments up front. That's what changes it. So they will all get that. That's the essence of it. And there's a really important thing where we are actively in discussion with government. It needs to be long enough, the business rates retention, which is what drives that cash, for there to be sufficient money to invest to make the big changes. The enterprise zone gave us 25 years. It is currently a live debate with government whether the investment zone will also have 25 years. That's where the big money comes from. What you could also mean by your question is there another supplementary investment at the beginning? That would be wonderful if the government were to do that. I don't think they will, is the straight answer. But providing the model is there for 25 years, you get real cash to make those game-changing interventions. And I have literally spoken to the Secretary of State about it, we've talked to the FT about it, so this debate that's going on, we're really lobbying hard on the basis of our experience for that lengthy period, because that's what gives you the cash to make it work. Is that clear? Yeah. What was the second part of your question?
So it's around red lines on planning environment.
Yeah. So, and this is also the conversation we literally have been having with government ministers and lobbyists and anybody else who wants to listen. I do not believe that that the success of these is some wonderful liberalisation of planning. The reason that development doesn't happen in East Birmingham isn't because the planning isn't there, it's because the proposals aren't financially viable. And that's why you've got to have what we've just described. So I see it as very much the lesser part of the offer. And I've also said to them directly, I don't believe that a removal of environmental considerations is anything to do with the success of this at all. Couldn't be more clear on that. Indeed, the experience is almost the opposite. Investors want to go to places where the environmental standards are very high.
Just for continuing on the investment zone, so looking to the future that they go ahead and we get the requests that we've made for the region. How are you going to, or are there any mitigations, or will there be any mitigations in place to prevent unintended consequences? And what I mean by that is, for argument's sake, you have a company, say in Telford, bordering Wolverhampton, you have an investment zone in Wolverhampton, the company relocates, doesn't create any additional work, and actually, leaves people behind, and then just goes to the sort of the deregulated area to operate in. So how will you ensure that it's actually to fulfil the intended design, the intended plan of an investment zone?
This is actually the impossible question. It's not just for me, is it? It's for everybody. I think there's two answers. The first is that one of the things, and Karen Grinsall, Deputy Leader of Solihull, was very eloquent on this last Friday in the leaders' meeting, actually. One of the things that we're saying to government is there has to be no detriment to our local authorities in terms of losing the business rates income that is going to go into the model that I've just talked about. It's all very exciting getting that model to do the remodel, getting that cash to do the remodelling, but somebody loses this. So that's also a live debate. Now, that's only one aspect of what you mean, but local authorities losing out is covered through the no detriment piece. To be really clear, there is not yet a commitment from government over that, but there was in the enterprise zone piece. Okay. Then the second aspect of this is, how do you make sure that this is additive rather than it's just what was going to happen anyway, and a footloose company suddenly decides to go into a place? It's not being naive. Some of that will happen. But the whole answer is that by making a place much more investable, and that might mean infrastructure, it might mean skills development, it might mean broadband improvement, whatever, and that's why you have to have this cash fund up front. You actually draw in things that wouldn't otherwise have happened. And remember, a lot of the investments we're after are internationally competitive. And if you think of the big investments that have happened here in Birmingham City Centre on the back of the enterprise zone, this wasn't a question of, would it be here or would it be in, I don't know, in Walsall Town Centre? That's can we win this internationally? And I think that's the way, that's the sort of mindset you've got to have about this. And if you think of the Gigafactory, that is certainly an international question. It's us against Spain, us against Croatia. So, sorry, Slovakia. That's how you've got to think about it being net additional.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to raise on investment zones? Councillor Tennant.
Sorry, I'm speaking a lot today. You just mentioned in your answer to the chair about cash up front driving some of this stuff. But when we talked about funding, answer to my question, you talked about business rate retention being the funding model. That is obviously after the fact. So
with pleasure. I understand why you say that, but let me just explain. The way the model worked for the enterprise zone, remember I was chair of the LEP at the time when we presided over it, so I do have the scars of this. The business rates come in later on, yes, on the back of what you've done, but you invest the cash at the beginning and you borrow it, and the repayment of it is the business rates that come in later on. So my whole argument with government is you can only make those investments up front if there is a long enough stream of business rates in the future to repay the investments you make up front. That's exactly what happened in Birmingham.
I mean, it might be appropriate now to pick up the question on the LEPs. This again was a council tenant question. So do you want to question on LEPs? I'll pick it up. So some questions from that we talked about in the work.
In that meeting. So.
Right. Okay. I'll pick that up then with you, Mayor.
Fine.
So given that the LEPs are now winding up and their future role is limited, how do you and the CA ensure that it continues to engage with the business community and that the needs of the business sector are considered as part of our decision-making process?
Yeah, it's a very fair question. So LEPs have done in the West Midlands a very good job. Let's be clear about that. And I'm no what's the word, a celebrator of their demise, but it is a decision across the country. So what we've now got to do is work out how we best integrate them into the combined authority, and that's a very live project at the moment. To be clear, some of the things that they have done will continue to be done in slightly different government structures. So the growth hubs, for example, they will continue. The Enterprise Zone Board for Birmingham and indeed the Black Country will continue. That doesn't have to come into the CA. But the core economic development functions do come into the CA. So we're literally right down into some of the detail of which officers will move across and all the 2P arrangements and all of that. But to your fundamental question about how we make sure businesses are involved in our decision making, there are three businesses and the universities actually, because that's been one of the critical things of the LEPs. There's 3 quick points. First of all, business representatives sit on all sorts of our subcommittees and groups. There was stuff come back to right at the beginning about policy being designed coming up through the exec. They're already able to influence all of that. Then we have 2 formal structures, one of which is what we call the Economic Impact Group, which I chair fortnightly with all the chambers, the IOD, the you name it, all the representative bodies. So there's a way that very regularly they input into our thinking. And then last year we set up what we call the Regional Business Council, which is purely advisory, but it is the CEOs of many of the region's biggest corporations, chaired independently by Liv Garfield, who's the CEO of Severn Trent in Coventry. So we have acted to find lots of other ways that the private sector can influence the decision making. And what we've just got one more piece of work to do. And of course, the economic decisions are taken through a sub-board of the main board. It sounds bureaucratic, but we call it the Economic Growth Board. We're just making sure those things I've just described are properly connected into the Economic Growth Board. But I think the bottom line answer is recognise the risk and we're acting to make sure that the voice is still heard really strongly.
Thank you. Has anybody got any supplementary questions to ask? No? Okay, I'm going to, yes, Councillor Sutherland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's very pertinent, actually, with regards to the Greater Birmingham and Solihull LEP, which is winding up.
Yeah.
Are you satisfied that it's progressing well? Because we've got a timeline. March 20.
The sadness is I was supposed to have a drink last night with the chair of the GBS LEP, so I might be able to answer this question better if I had done it, but didn't. But the one word answer is yes. I think all 3 LEPs, their boards have done a really mature, sensible job, because I know they wouldn't wish to be in this situation, but they are. And they've really thought about the programme of transition. We review it regularly at the CA board as well and the Economic Growth Board, and I'm sure there's bumps, it's not perfect, but if you push me on one word, yes, I believe everyone's working collaboratively to make sure we protect the best of the LEP work.
Thank you. I didn't purposely ask that to lead into another question. I'm not comfortable that they're comfortable with opportunities that may come their way, how they handle them properly, and certainly that was one area that left 1 or 2 of us councillors worried.
Well, in the spirit of what I said right at the beginning, if there's something you think we should be doing better or we should be working with them to do better, please call it out. If what you mean is around opportunities around investment opportunities, yes, nothing. I mean, we do have a very formal structure for that, which is that the growth company is the inward investment agency for all of the combined authority area. And one of the debates here is how we make sure it is sufficiently strong to deal with some stuff that LEPs probably did informally before. Because if you'd asked me who was responsible for an investment, even when the LEPs were there, I would have said the growth company. But I do know that LEPs dealt with some inquiries, but fundamentally the growth company must man up to that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to move on to the transport questions now, just moving things around a little bit, just so that Councillor Akhtar can ensure that he can get his question in. So, Councillor Akhtar, do you want to take yours first?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Andy, recently in Coventry, the National Express, the operator, have withdrawn the buses from quite a few routes, affecting a lot of school children. When it was challenged, they gave the reason that we don't have enough drivers to, to go on these routes. So, can you please tell us what the combined authority is doing to, work with the operator to recruit more drivers, so our residents can have a bus service they deserve? Thank you, Chair.
With pleasure. If you don't mind, though, I'm just going to question what you've been told by National Express, because I think it's quite important. This there are beginnings, as you know, of a public consultation on changes to the bus services on the 1st of January, and that is leading to the potential of a small number of routes, including some school services in Coventry, all right, being withdrawn. Now, it is not true, and if you National Express have said this to you, it is fundamentally untrue. It is not true that they are withdrawing those services because of lack of drivers. That is all because of the financial sustainability of those services. And I have had umpteen meetings, telephone calls with the CEO of National Express West Midlands, and they have never said they're withdrawing services because of lack of drivers. You are absolutely right, though, to say they are currently short of drivers across the whole region, and that is leading to a failure of reliability of the service. But we really must be clear, it is not that that's leading to the review of the total service offer in January. And on the review of the offer, which is the core question, I think actually Transport for West Midlands have done a good job in actually protecting almost everything. So we're down, I think, now to about, Laura will correct me if this is wrong, somewhere between 17 and 35 services. Oh, is that correct, Jeff? Of which we believe the consultation will find, if not whole solutions, part solutions for most of them. You are right, though. The bit that is looking most difficult are some of the school services in Coventry, but it's not because of the availability of drivers. Now, on the driver piece, though, it is a real issue. I think they're about 400 people short. What we have been doing, it's their principal responsibility, right, to call us out what we can do. We've been running umpteen job fairs where we get behind National Express. We've been running training programs with them. So wherever we can, we're working with them on that. But I promise you, it is not the reason that the service review is as it is.
Can I come back, Chair?
Yes,
yeah,
please. Because if you've been told that, I'm slightly worried because that's just not right.
That's fine. That's fine. Thank you for clarifying. But there is a little bit contradiction in your own response, Mayor, where you're saying that regionally they have issue with the drivers' numbers.
Yes.
But in Coventry, you're basically saying they don't have that problem. So because it's the same company operating in our region.
Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, no, I did not say that. Let's just be really clear. There is a problem of driver numbers everywhere. Indeed, if we were having this conversation in Manchester or Liverpool, London, exactly the same. There is a problem of driver numbers. Coventry has got that as much as anybody else. But that is different to the decision that they have made about what service, or the proposal they've made and worked with us on about the services they're going to run from the 1st of January. No one has ever said the reason for that proposal is the lack of drivers.
Thank you for that, and I will challenge this through different channels.
Please do.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, so I've got Councillor Waters and then Councillor Tennant.
Hi Andy, it's not really a question, it's just an observation. There's a report in one of the local newspapers actually stating that National Express operators have seen a rise of 33% in the past 3 months of passengers. So it is starting to pick up. And as for reducing in January, it may not be the case that they have to reduce, because what do you think, Andy?
I think you're on to absolutely the dynamic here. So the latest stats are that bus patronage is about 82% of where it was pre-pandemic. And it's pretty even in the different parts of the conurbation, actually. And the costs of running the service, and we'll all understand this, bus drivers have had increases in pay, and petrol or whatever fuel they're using has gone up. It's about 120% of where it was pre-pandemic. So you can see the challenge they've got. And this is what then, and again, it's the same everywhere, whether you're running a franchise model or whatever. And you can see the challenge. Now, you are absolutely right. If we can get that 82% back to 100%, it takes the pressure off this. So what we are saying to National Express is, you'd be very stupid to dismantle your network now on the basis of what might be almost a worst case. Let's work with us to protect it, and then hopefully that number will improve. So it's a really important variable that you pull out. Now, that's why, and I do actually give credit to them for this, but that's why they've rolled their dice in favour of fare reductions and freezes to try to drive more people on. Of course, some of the background things might drive more people onto the bus. The fuel is going up, you're less likely to use your car. The clean air zone charge in Birmingham hopefully will drive more people to use the bus. There's lots of things that says we should be really optimistic over public. And of course, if you improve the quality of the vehicle, you improve the speed at which they go through traffic, all of that will drive patronage. So all the conversations we have with National Express is keep the faith, keep driving the patronage, just as you say, then you won't need to get into this vicious circle of decline. And the extra bit in this is we've managed to get this £88 million from government under what we call the Bus Service Improvement Plan. And a good chunk of that is being used to support National Express's services. I have to be careful how I say this because it's slightly controversial area with government, exactly how we use that money. If I just say some of that money is going to National Express to give them confidence in what we're doing, that's another part of the way we square that circle. Being very careful how I choose my words there. But your point basically is spot on. If we can get the patronage back up, it begins to solve itself.
Yeah.
Let me just ask Laura, if I have described that completely accurately, because it's a technical issue and we're also in the midst of commercial negotiations over that. So I just want to make sure that the officers are happy with how I've described it.
Absolutely. I would just say our interests and theirs are aligned in getting as many passengers as we possibly can back on the buses to keep them all running. But yes, absolutely. We're in the middle of a commercial negotiation, but that is the sole aim and objective for both sides. So we're as optimistic as we can be. It is a very serious national problem as well.
And, you know, this makes no difference to someone standing in a bus stop in Darlaston if their bus doesn't come. But when you stand and look about how we're navigating this against other conurbations, I'm really quite pleased. We're still running the exact number, 93.7% of the services pre-pandemic, even though there's only 82% patronage, and we're trying to maintain that number above 90%. I think when all this is done, we will be the best in the country in terms of those numbers.
your light off, please?
Oh, sorry.
It's all right. Okay, so Councillor Kettle, do you want to pick up the questions around the metro? I'm quite happy to pick up the Dudley one if you want to pick up the general one, but I'll leave it with yourself.
I had a question on.
Oh, sorry, Ian, sorry, my fault. I'd missed out Councillor Tennant. I'll come to you next.
I'll make the apologies. I'll be quick. Some of the bus services at risk are the ones my residents, my ward Wheeling and Selly Oak used to get to the hospital.
Yes.
Is there any calculation of public health concerns being taken by National Express?
This is for the first time where I don't know the detail. You know how I hate that. I know the numbers though that you're talking about. I actually don't know if that features anything. It certainly features though in how we then respond. Because the way this works is that National Express decide what they're doing commercially. Then if they say we're not going to support this, the TFWM, through our subsidy of the services, then we can decide to offer them as a subsidised service. And in that, all those social issues are brought into the consideration. But I actually do not know technically whether National Express review that in their own judgments, but we certainly do.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Kettle.
Thank you, Jen. And this aspect is about the problems we had last year with the Metro. Now, I fundamentally accept that you are not directly responsible for the Metro. Or yes, there's a finger in the pie, but you are. I'm being kind to you and being fair that you are not directly responsible. But my question is about the impacts on the West Midlands economy of the tram closures last year. What has been the cost of this failure, and how confident can we be that we won't find ourselves in the same situation come December? December's irrelevant, but the point is, have we got over the problems, and what was the damage done by the loss of service on 2 or 3 occasions last year?
I want to say we have got over the problem, but I think the best way of me answering that is to give you the information, and you'll see why I just I just pause. Because the situation is this, the origin of this, as everybody knows, was physical cracks in the chassis in 2 places. First of all, around the bogie, i.e. where the wheels join the body, and then around the doors. And these cracks were found at different times, hence the 2 different stoppages. Now, what has had to happen is a full repair programme that was done by the engineers from the manufacturer, at their cost, by the way, on the Metro Depot site, and then off-site as well. And we are still continuing that programme of repairs. Now, the optimist in me says, therefore, we have got enough repaired trams and new trams to run the service, which is what is now happening. But the bit of me that says I've still got a caution is once you've had 2 examples like that, you are obviously left thinking, could there be something else? We do not know of anything else at the moment. They've all been fully inspected. But I think if the word is guarantee that you're trying to draw out of me, it is actually quite difficult when you've had 2 fairly spectacular failures like that to be anything other than concerned. But the straight answer is there is nothing we know at the moment that would tell us that we would face another suspension in the service.
What really interests me, Andy, is the economic impact, the loss of footfall, the loss of trade up to Christmas, the loss of faith in the service, in effect.
Yeah.
So what I'm more interested in is the economic impact. What you think the economic impact was of that disruption?
Yeah, and the answer to that is limited. And the reason for that, first of all, some of the disruption occurred where we were still rebuilding from COVID anyway, but also we were able to offer alternative forms of transport. And the other piece of evidence that says it wasn't long-term scarring is actually the recovery of the patronage on the service has actually been very dramatic. So it does not look, so we talked about that 82% figure earlier on, the figure for the Metro actually got back to very near 100 as soon as we got the service back. So it looks very much as though people made alternative arrangements during the disruption, but then were very quick to return to the same form. So that would tell you that there wasn't a long-term change of behaviour, which is really what your question is driving at.
So you wouldn't say that it cost the West Midlands economy, say, 100 million, or?
Certainly not. Certainly not. The evidence, because we've looked at the behaviour, is it cost. There was definitely inconvenience. There was definitely disruption. No one's questioning that in any way. But it does not look as though people stopped their commuting or movements, whatever, for the long term, because the recovery has come back. And that's in sharp contrast to what we've said about buses, where there was clearly, on the back of the pandemic, a really serious change of behaviour. That does not appear to have occurred. The deduction would be that people made alternative arrangements. I'm not in any way, negating the importance of that. It doesn't look to have a long-term damaging impact.
Councillor Waters with a supplementary.
It's just along the lines of the Dudley extension.
Yes.
Has there any funding been found to actually put this in place, or are we still sourcing funding for that?
Okay, so thank you for answering this. I've got to answer, haven't I? Asking this, Vera, because this was the bit I think was a little inaccurate last week. Through no one's intention, it was just difficult. So let's be really clear. The funding that was originally granted by government is still there. And that plus some local funding is sufficient now to build the line from Wednesbury to Dudley. That, in contrast to what was reported from last week's meeting, is going ahead. Diggers in the ground, lots of pictures of Councillor Pat Harley standing in his hard hat in Dudley Town Centre. It is happening, and it should open in 2024. And really, our message to the contractor there is full steam ahead. And the reason, obviously, for pressing full steam ahead is it will actually, the quicker we go, the less the thing will cost. So there's a real advantage in getting on with it, no indecision. Okay, that's very important. Now, where the challenge exists is the Dudley to Brierley Hill piece of it. Just let me explain this again, because again, when I explain, I think you'll know how I get it. So obviously there has been inflation in the cost of building the line. That is not a primary issue. Primary issue is that the total project was funded against the fares we were expecting in the future, and more importantly, the profit that we were expecting in the future. And just the same as the buses, if the profit is likely to be less, we have got less money to invest in the building. So it is a change in the funding model at the same time that the actual construction cost goes up. So where we are right now is we do not have enough money for the full cost of the Dudley to Brierley Hill. So we are working on how we can get that money. And there's three real options around it, and the board has, let's just be really clear, and again, this was very important in how it was reported last week. The board met to review this in July, and every leader gave their firm commitment to this being a priority all the way to Brierley Hill. And to ask the officers, and ultimately me, to find the cash to do that. So it's not been, quote unquote, axed beyond Dudley or anything. There's a firm commitment to do this. We have to find the funding. There's three basic sources from the funding. Number one, we get the money from government. So like earlier question, I tried to seek assurance from Liz Truss that she would support this. We've got to see what, that she gave that commitment, wrote in the Express and Star about it. We have to see what that actually means. Number two, we could divert some funding from other transport projects. We have a contingency in what we call our City Region Sustainable Transport Fund. It's an option. The board would have to agree it. It's not done so yet. And then thirdly, just like the conversation around buses, if we can get a patronage, and it's why Ian's question about the reliability of the service is so important, if we can get a patronage and the profit on the metro back up, then you can invest the cash against that in the future. So we've got 3 things we've got to do to find this money. We've given the leader of Dudley a clear commitment. We will come back to the board in January with how we intend to do this. And that's the current work. So it's a long answer, but it's important everyone's clear.
Thanks for the clarity, Andy. And I think as a local Dudley councillor, and speaking on behalf of Councillor Kettle, who'll correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think as local councillors we weren't under any other impression that we believed it would go ahead to Dudley. It was the extension bit that was always in doubt, and I'm well aware of the reports that have gone to board and the implications around that. There was just one thing as an alternative option, which I seem to remember was discussed, was around transport levies. Has that been ruled off the table now as an alternative or as an additional funding source to try to meet some of the shortfall?
I think it's fair to say nothing's been ruled off the table. It is an option. Just what the transport levy is for everyone to know is the charge that the CA makes to each individual local authority. Most of the levy, though, goes to pay the operational costs of the transport in year. But it's going up in the draft budget 2% again next year, 2% this year, obviously a lot less than inflation, having been fixed for many years. But it is an option, but to be really clear, nothing has been agreed around it. And the only thing that is in the draft budget is a 2% increase that will go to the operational stuff. And again, just linking some of the conversations together, the services around the QE, if they cease to be a commercial service and become a subsidised service, that's where, for example, the levy is spent. So, we've got lots of, and it comes back to the ambition against reality question. We've got lots of demands on that, and then it's got to come from the levy there.
Councillor Kettle.
Just to come in here on the, I've seen figures of 179 million and 240 million in the shortfall. Which figure is the more likely figure?
Oh dear. I actually can't remember. Which is fine. Because the reason I think it goes like this, actually, Laura, if you can remember the details, please correct me. But if you don't remember it, neither do I, we will get a precise answer for you. The 240 is very much the maximum it could be. We did, when the paper went to the board, we did a range of figures, and I think the way it was that the lower figure was what you might call a more likely outcome. There's also the question of it was a total for the whole metro investment project, so including Birmingham East Side. And I think the number for the Wednesbury to Briley Hill was about 196, Laura, if you remember correctly, as the maximum number. So there are 2 different things being quoted here, total project and that line. And again, it's also true, and you can see from what I said earlier about how we might solve it, there isn't one fixed point answer because it depends on a number of these moving parts. Do you want to add any detail to that, Will?
No, I was just saying so many factors will impact on that number, including where eventually we get to deciding about the timing and the phasing, the spending of money against those works, and obviously inflation, which is why it's such a large range. So it's probably going to be a moving feast, but we can definitely bring a written update back through this committee.
Thank you. If it would be helpful, and given it's so, it's so significant, this, I've got no difficulty with committee members here having the board paper around this. And what it will show is that there are any financial modelling it's only as good as the last time you made the assumptions, and that's why the genuinely is the sort of range that you're talking about, Councillor Kelly.
Yep, that would be helpful. Thank you very much for that. Any other questions relating to Metro and Metro delivery? Okay. Councillor Waters, do you want to pick up question around holding bus operators to account?
Yes, thank you, Chair. What are your views on the effectiveness of West Midlands Alliance and Transport of West Midlands enhanced partnership arrangements with bus operators? Do these arrangements allow elected representatives, including yourself, to hold bus operators adequately to account? And can I ask me a supplementary when I spoke to you about as well? Well, yeah, right. Now, I've been informed that National Express are actually just started floating shares on the stock market. Would you be in favour of them actually offering their staff shares in National Express? Because years ago we had West Midlands Travel, and the drivers stroke staff actually had shares in the company, and I remember back it gave them a lot more incentive to work because they was actually shareholders, they was having their say in everything, and they was a lot more comfortable with their working.
So, gosh, fascinating. Two fascinating questions. Let's take the second one first because it's the easiest one for me by a country mile. Categorically, yes. I mean, if you think of my background, for 31 years, I led an organisation that was employee owned. So the whole point of having a model where workers can be part of the leadership of the organisation, I fervently believe in. It's what brings people together naturally, and the conventional way of doing it is some form of share ownership. So often bonuses are given in shares. So yeah, but when you say they're just raising cash on the market, I mean, there's perhaps another just moment of reflection on this. That hopefully means that they're raising that cash to invest, and of course they are a Birmingham-based international company, and so their success is good for this city. And the fact they're offering services across the US, all sorts of European countries, and it's headquartered here, creating jobs here. That is an interesting reflection in their expansion, really. But yeah, if they could bring about a sort of element of employee ownership, I would dearly like to see that. Yeah. I'm actually a huge believer that national legislation should encourage that more than it does, frankly. Right, now then, enhanced partnership. So the answer here is yes, but. So let me explain what I mean by that. I actually think the TfWM, have done a good job with National Express in many ways through the enhanced partnership. And we talked about all that about fares, lowest fares in the country outside London. We've talked about them trying to protect their route. If you look at the investment they're making in new vehicles and the quality enhanced partnerships in Birmingham City Centre and Solihull, you can see the progress that is making. You look at the quality of the vehicles, certainly I know it's less good in the Black Country before someone corrects me, but the centre here, the investment they've made is huge. So there's lots of very positive aspects. If I think of some of the schemes we've worked on together to quicken the speed of vehicles as well, like the sprint routes along the A51, really good. And we're just getting data in about how much more reliable services are on the back of that investment in the infrastructure. So there's lots of positive things. There's two things I'm disappointed in at the moment. Their operational performance. Back to what you were saying earlier on, people standing at a bus stop and it not coming, it's not good enough. And this is back to Councillor Akhtar's question about lack of drivers, and we haven't cracked that together. And the other thing I'm disappointed in, we've seen other operators go out of business through the pandemic, and we've now got even more reliance on National Express. And even though I've been very positive about them in some ways, I would be much happier if we had other strong operators to keep them on their toes.
Can I come back, Chair? No, it's because I actually am a bus user, because I don't drive. I get to speak to passengers, I speak to drivers. I've got many friends who are drivers, and the consensus from them is at the moment, they've got drivers that are actually, I don't know if you're aware, they've actually got drivers that are actually leaving who've got 20 years service. They're actually leaving because they don't feel as though they're actually being valued. And they've got new drivers coming in who are getting a 2K bonus and they're not getting anything. So when I said about the incentive of having shares, if something like that was actually offered to them, it may actually give them the incentive that they are really valued.
Yeah, thank you. Briefly, I appreciate you sharing that with me actually, because there is clearly an issue with the what you might call the retention rate in National Express, which our team are having active conversations with them. So thank you. I'll make sure that's understood.
Thank you for picking that up, Councillor Waters. Really useful experience, I think, with that. We've got another couple of quick questions on transport before we move on to environment and skills. So these next two questions have been kind of reallocated following the working group that we had, the pre-meeting we'd had. So I'll hand over to Councillor Lumbie if you're happy to pick up the next question.
I think in some ways you've been answering it as I go along. This is about how you actually grow the bus market rather than just stem it. Now, you mentioned the 88 million of funding. You're no doubt aware Shropshire, we've got nothing, and neither did Telford. I was interested when you were very careful when you said about some of that money is going to be used to go towards the STEM side to keep it going, when the whole point of the funding was actually to improve the service. So how do you think you'll spend some of it improving the service for buses?
Yeah, it very interesting. So first thing to say is lots of places around the country got nothing, including some of the other mayoral authorities actually. So again, credit's where it's due. We did well relatively to get the cash that we did, and of course it followed on from the over £1 billion that we got on the City Region Sustainable Transport. And I do think one thing we should constantly be asking ourselves is, are we doing relatively well against other places in our bids to government and frankly getting the resources we need? But in this one the answer is categorically we did. And the reason we did was I think we were able to demonstrate that in all sorts of ways the cash was going to be used to improve the service, which, back to the earlier conversation, drives the patronage, holds down the fares, and you get into the virtuous circle. And just probably three highlights to pick out. Number one, really important work around fares. So the fact that we've got capping already, and we're now moving to, we've got the cash now for capping between different modes, so rail, bus, metro, even bikes, everything. That's good practical progression work, and it will drive greater patronage. There's work around physical improvements as well. So we were just talking about the Walsall Road and the Coventry Road and the service to Solihull, and then improved reliability. And then the next whole area would be information for passengers. Now, I think we can do a lot better on this. I've stood at stops on the Bristol Road and it says it's coming and it isn't. So there's, again, money in there. But what I hope you see just from the examples is that we've got to deal with all of the things that help people judge if they will take that form of transport. So we've genuinely got, clues in the title, an improvement plan, and we've got to hold everyone to account to get it out. But at the heart of it, you've got to have an alliance with your main operator, and we've got to work on it together, and that's how they get some of that money. Yeah. Go on, you explain it, Gloria. They've heard enough of my voice.
I was just going to say there's another thing that is also really important. We have a very good Safer Travel partnership here based in this building, which is British Transport Police, West Midlands Police, and ourselves. Especially on routes that might suffer from antisocial behaviour, being able to be out and have a visible presence to make sure that passengers feel safe on taking public transport is also a very big motivator in ensuring that people have a demand and a use of public transport. So that's just one other sort of element of what we do here to make sure that we're helping passengers continue to use public transport.
Councillor Rainbow?
Yes, you've sort of touched on the financial consequences of not increasing passenger rates on buses. But I suppose in terms of looking at things like congestion, getting people specifically out of their cars to improve the reliability.
Yeah.
What's been done to do that? Because obviously there'll be consequences on pollution, on congestion, and a multitude of other things.
Yeah, great. This is the other side of it all, isn't it? Public transport as the answer to net zero. So this is another area where I think actually we're steadily developing a really good story. And you asked particularly about buses. We have already got won the competition for Coventry to be the first all-electric bus city. That will be about 250 new vehicles. I know you weren't there, but just outside the Conservative Party conference, we parked one of those new vehicles for everyone to see, and it looks swell. So that is funding secured, the order's in with the manufacturers. We've actually met one of the manufacturers there, incredibly pleased because his job's in Northern Ireland, and that will be the first city to have an all-electric fleet. So that's an incredible win for us. And then if we turn to, and those buses, they're due to be coming by the summer, they're a bit late, but they're basically on the way. And then if you look at Birmingham and the Black Country, we were also successful with the biggest application for hydrogen vehicles. Obviously, there's 20 that the City Council arranged on the 51 route to Walsall already, but this will be the biggest fleet anywhere in Western Europe, 124 vehicles, and there's all the stuff about how they're going to be refuelled and all that working through. And National Express, again, back to them, are just on the verge of another really significant order for clean vehicles. So with all that we can do. And there is clear evidence that if you put a new clean vehicle on, that more people choose to use it, the quality of the journey and all of that is better. So there's lots going on that. And then the second element of it is making sure that the vehicles are not stuck in congestion. And this is a big part of our City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, horrible branding, but that's what it's called, where there is cash for a number of enhanced routes. And a really good example of this actually is the sort of work that's gone on in Solihull on Lode Lane and into the town centre there, where if you improve the infrastructure, again, it improves the reliability. And just recently, the works that have been done, I mentioned it 3 times, but just very quickly, on the Coventry Road, and lots of people complain about the roadworks, but actually now we've got something where I think the numbers were put together on Monday. We've got about a 30% improvement in reliability and an 18% improvement in journey times. So how quick it is and how certain it's going to be. So again, clear evidence that we are investing behind doing that. And I think the headline of this, the next thing to look out for, is what we're calling our cross-city routes. And the first one will come next year. We've got funding for 4, where we will physically improve sort of bus priority. The first one, I'm sorry to be into the detail, will be the 50 and the 87, 2 of the busiest routes, and then that to do the infrastructure to get that improved reliability.
Yeah, I think so. I suppose in terms of the way that you're communicating it as well, particularly targeting car users. Yeah. What's been done in that space as well, because that's a massive part of the challenge, is actually telling people about this.
So I think it's constant, this, isn't it? So everything, all the publicity we're trying to do around fares, around new vehicles, you have to look at the comms output from the CA. It's constantly on this. But maybe you not just to say we should be doing more around the big picture, your contribution to the environment. But really honest as well, going back to the very first question, there is something about the cost of living crisis will, I think, change behaviours here as well. So we've got to be ready to offer an alternative then. Thank you. It's a good prompt.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to the next set of questions now, which is environment and skills.
Chair, can I ask a question on transport? It's part of the skill. My question was from a long-term strategy point of view. What kind of work are we doing from a sort of blue sky approach for the integration of autonomous vehicles, both to give us a faster spine or a mesh, a bit more like London, and a flexible small vehicle system to improve the connectivity across our housing estates and things like that, so vastly lower journey times?
Thank you. So lots is the answer. This needs a whole separate session on it. The one bit of your question, Martin, that I'm not clear about is why you say there's a network for autonomous in the eye. You're referring to the Greenwich network, are you?
A bit more like the way London the tube works. I mean, quite often a Londoner gets on, they go from here to here to there. They take 3 tubes. It's quite quick.
Yeah.
And to go on surface with something that's that quick, perhaps.
Well, we're trying to invest in the physical infrastructure, as we've talked about. Also, what they already have in London is the interoperability of fares capping. I've said very clearly, we've now got the funding for that. We will do that. And I'm pushing this lot to do it as quickly as possible. It's a big IT project, and you'll be interested to know, by the way, we've been given the funding to do that on behalf of the whole country, not just for ourselves. So we've got to design it so it can then be applied in Manchester, Liverpool, and everywhere else. But that funding is now secured. It's a live project. We will have the best version of that. And by the way, here it will include rail. It doesn't in London, heavy rail. But the other way of taking your question is much more about the autonomous vehicle. And of course, we do have here the biggest test network in the country between Coventry, Solihull and Birmingham, offering motorway, A roads, local roads. So all that is underway with our universities. And of course, the really exciting thing is we're seeing that technology being used potentially in the BLR system that will come to Coventry as well. So that's exciting. And then what we're also doing, and there's news on this, when you talked about penetrating into housing estates, this new on-demand responsive bus, as we call it, that we're trialling in, we've started the trial in Coventry. It's now extended to areas of Solihull. I hope we're going to get it to the whole of Solihull very shortly. It is basically using Uber technology for public transport, and it's been an incredible success. And I see that as the way of answering, getting the answer in currently underserved semi-rural areas. So we have got some really innovative things there. Thank you. Interesting question.
Councillor Kettle.
Oh, thank you. Andy, you've touched on several aspects of my jottings and traffic congestion, you know, and the speedy allocation of funds when they come through to get on with traffic schemes. Is there a case, you know, what I'm saying is fundamentally to congestion impacts on the mobility of labour, which is fundamentally one of our successes. When you think of the last 30 years. Is there a case for committing a percentage of funds available when they become available for alleviating congestion when things in the pipeline waiting to go?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The reason we're all investing in transport as fast as we can, and it's actually links back to your metro question as well. When it fails, what's the economic impact? Is that we all know the conurbations that have the highest productivity are those where people can move around most easily. So it's absolutely the heart of it. So how do you alleviate congestion? Some of the public transport pieces we've been talking about obviously are all around that, but I am also a believer that sometimes you've got to continue to invest in significant road schemes to do that as well. And actually free-flowing roads, as we all know, are less polluting than congested roads. But it has to be a choice. And if you take a really good example, I am very pleased that Junction 10 on the M6 is very near to completion, because that, and indeed Junction 5 on the M42, the really critical points that we're dealing with. Now, so if you look in our, head on to your question, if you look in our £1 billion that we got, for City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement, that we have, I think, made the right judgment between road schemes, active travel schemes and public transport schemes. And it is very deliberate that all three are in there, because I think we would be being unrealistic if we said that a good free-flowing road system, particularly for industries like freight, wasn't really important. So I think you can examine that and see that that judgment was made. Yeah. There is a separate question that Ian almost gets to, but the chair might not wish us to go there, which is how do we quicken the pace of delivery, where that is definitely a big challenge that you and I talked about before, which we haven't got the best answers to yet. It's a real challenge. Some of these things are agonisingly slow.
Maybe we'll pick that up with you in writing then.
Oh dear, I've walked into that trap.
Thank you for that. If we can move on then, so Councillor Rainbow and Green Corridors.
Yeah, so it was recently announced that the West Midlands would be building 700,000 new homes across Birmingham, Coventry, and I think Wolverhampton. I was really pleased to see that. I think it's really important that everybody has a right to a decent home. I know previously you've publicly committed to building on brownfield sites, and I think that's the right approach. But given this is quite an ambitious scheme, there's extremely limited space in Birmingham, and the new government, or certainly the new PM, doesn't share your views about protecting green spaces. Can you confirm whether it will be your policy that green space won't be used to build these houses?
Good. I'm glad we got off buses. So important as they are. Just either I misheard or you've misread. I don't think we've ever said 700,000 homes. Did I hear you correctly?
Yes.
Yes, there was a press release on Birmingham City Council's website that was a photo of you and Ian, I think you were quoted as part of it.
700,000. I am genuinely surprised because the regional housing target, and the only thing that's certain about this target is that it's wrong, because it's the same thing. It depends on the assumptions you last made. Is 215,000 homes by 2031. So we've just tripled it in a bit, and I'm slightly terrified at that. So we definitely need to see where this piece is. It doesn't negate your question. Your question is still absolutely spot on. But I do think that's the number that the regional housing target is working to. And again, if you just think about it, the Black Country local plan at the moment, the target is 76,000 homes there. That makes sense in the 215. So I honestly don't think it can be 700,000. I'm slightly panic struck at that. But anyway, but your question's right. So you asked me what my view is, and it is actually to double down on brownfield first, for all sorts of reasons. Now, let's just be clear. This is not easy. There are some parts of the conurbation where there isn't a lot of brownfield. The Solihull councillors are sort of saying, well, how does this work in Vauxhall Common? But I still stand by what I say. We've got to double down. So let's just think about what's happening here. Over the last few years, we've done a really good job of building the total number of homes across the West Midlands. Now, again, let's not be complacent. It hasn't dealt with all the availability issues and challenges in Birmingham by any means. But in terms of the region as a whole, we've been hitting our target number for every year, and the huge majority of them have been on brownfield sites, and that's because all of the local authorities have been working hard to bring forward brownfield with us, and I genuinely think you need to be pretty tough with developers in showing you really are committed to that. I had an approach from a major housing developer who shall remain nameless last week about 2 sites in Birmingham, basically saying, please change your approach. And I just wrote them back and said, no, we're not changing our approach. So I do think being consistent and robust about this is very important. I also think you've got to deal with some of the more difficult issues around brownfield. We've probably done lots of the easier sites. I had a wonderful day on Tuesday. I was out in Walsall looking at 2 sites in Darlaston, which have been derelict for 30 years and are now being regenerated. When you see that, you think our determination, the cash we've used, really has brought progress about here. But we've got through the easier ones. We're now into some tougher ones. Now, where I have huge respect for what's happening in Birmingham, you're dealing with the whole issues of densification, and that is going to need to happen in other authorities as well. And we haven't quite got that in the same way in other areas. and we are in time going to need to see, certainly in the city centres in Coventry and Wolverhampton, we're going to see much more dense development than we've had. So the answer to your question is, perhaps stick with my approach, and I'm up for dealing with some of the more difficult issues that will come around this.
Thank you. So we've got a couple of questions next on retrofit. So if I can pick up Councillor Sutherland first and then Councillor Burrow, please.
Thank you, Chair. We all know that to enable us to reach net zero, retrofitting homes across the region is essential. As Mayor, are you able to lobby the government to help provide financial initiative schemes to help people with the cost of ensuring that their homes are more energy efficient, and as an example, by providing financial assistance to help install heat pumps or to insulate their homes? Thank you.
So the answer to the exact question you've asked is yes. I'm going to be, and of course there is a government fund for heat pumps, whether it's sufficient is another matter. But I'm actually going to be a little cheeky and say I don't think that's the most important thing the Mayor and the CA can do in this space. Actually, because I don't really believe that the most efficient way for the country to tackle this is for each individual householder, if they can afford it and if they're so minded, to do their own house. I want actually to show the government that there is a more efficient way of doing this by taking communities, and when I say communities, I probably mean about 300 homes together, and that you can get a real economy of scale and you can do all the things, so a full retrofit rather than if you just put a heat pump in, you get so much advantage. If you just put insulation in, you get so much advantage. You have to do the full thing. And that's why what we've set up in the CA is a sort of an expertise. We call it the Smart Hub, where we then work with individual local authorities to put forward whole community schemes for redevelopment. Forest Hill, Elmdon, Solihull would be good examples. We've just, of course, announced the first genuinely net zero neighbourhood in Brockmore in Dudley. So it's doing it at a bigger scale, and us playing an active role is where I think we can make the most impact. We've also said to government in our Trailblazer devolution deal, where we'd like a big transfer of funds, is the funds they've already allocated for retrofit are held there, and everybody puts their bid in for one little scheme, deeply inefficient. Give us the West Midlands cash and we will use that efficiently, as we've done in brownfield regeneration. So that's where I think our locus is on this.
Could I just respond? Thank you. I worry when you make that kind of a statement, because if we look at social homes, most authorities take care of that. What worries me is that there are a number of what effectively private homes, and to say collectively on a community-based scheme, I think it sounds elongated, probably complicated. I liked past initiatives where if I may use it, the gas board got involved and they spearheaded insulation and things like that. You know, get a new boiler and all that, those sorts of initiatives, and that's really what I'm driving at. We're in an energy efficiency situation,
and that's why I said the strict answer to your question is yes to the first bit. So it's not either or. The government can put funds aside to encourage private householders to do that, or use its agencies, as you say, but that is never going to tackle it at the scale that it needs, and it's not going to tackle some of the. You say that local authorities will deal with their own homes or their housing, or where it's outsourced to. That I don't think is true. I think there needs to be subsidy to help achieve that, actually, and that's what we're trying to prove. So it's not either or, but I know where we can play our role as a public authority. One other thing, by the way, which you will approve of, the other answer here, there's no way the government can afford all of this. This is a vast undertaking. The only way this will really drive is if the private sector funders come in. So what we're also trying to work in our specialist area is what's the private sector business model to actually where the banks will come in and make this a sustainable business as well. And if we can unlock that one, would have done something really meaningful.
Thank you.
Councillor Burrows.
Yes, I'm going to colour this with a bit of my own personal experience. I'm probably one of the few people in the country who's going to pay less for fuel this winter than I did 3 years ago. And that is because I took a number of decisions which other people are not capable of taking, because the home insulation industry is full of sharks. It's full of partial solutions, and people are scared putting their toes in the water. Now, I took the roof off my house because I had to do tiles, so I was able to get insulation underneath the tiles on the bits where the rooms go into the roof. I've insulated on the inside of the walls because mine is a solid wall house, but I know how to do carpentry, electrics and plumbing, so I was able to do that piece of it. I worked in an industry which was into insulation, so I knew the glass to specify for the windows and the type of stuff you put on these, and I did it all. I employed tradesmen to do most of it, but I did some of it myself. And I switched from electric underfloor heating to gas, would you believe? Because that's less CO2 emitting, because gas in my fire is 95% efficient, and in a power station it's about 35% efficient. All of those things I know and I can do because I have a mix of skills. What we need is a system whereby householders can get genuine advice, approved trader schemes where people can come along and help them out. Putting heat pumps in houses which are E-rated is a complete and utter waste of time. The cheapest thing you can do is insulate your house. Forget about heat pumps. Worry about that. That's a 2030s thing, that is. What we need is and I think there is a role for the local authorities. And when I think about how would that be delivered, well, if you live in north-west Solihull, is it Birmingham or is it Solihull? So there is a role, I think, for the combined authority, and A, helping come up with this is how you do it, and B, a trusted trader scheme of these are the people you get to.
I agree with what you said. There is a sense that, Andrew, the story almost proves the previous debate, because what we've said we will do, and Dudley for the first, is this whole net zero neighbourhood piece. Sounds like jargon, but what it actually means is we do everything, as you've said, to demonstrate you can get like a sort of economy of scale if you do all of this stuff. And we will, because everyone's learning about this early days, because everyone's not in your wonderful position to do it. So we'll get that expertise, prove that can be done, hopefully then get private sector cash behind it to give momentum to be able to take it as a more general model. And I do think there is a legitimate role for an authority to do that.
Because there is a lot of money in householders, not all householders' pockets, but people who can afford to pay should pay, because the government cannot afford to pay for it all. But what you could do is make it possible for them to do it.
Yeah. And I'm very conscious of time, but there's other elements as well. Where are the skilled trained people? So one of the things we are doing already is with 3 of our colleges, Walsall, Wolverhampton, Solihull, I think, we are actually funding the courses to get new skilled tradespeople through that, just as we're doing for electric vehicle technicians. So what we're trying to do is think about how we can help create a total industry here. It's a really difficult bit, though, is where is the return for the private investor in this new industry? And we've spoken to leaders of the biggest banks in the UK. They're all scratching their heads saying, what's it? Because that is what will really make it giant.
Do you want to pick up anything, Councillor Burrows, on are we doing about training providers?
Only on the general, I'm very pleased with the devolution on adult education and increasing stuff on that. I am mindful, my wife is Danish. I've met loads of Danes. Not one of them studied anything other than vocational training after school. Not one. What they did was directly focus on some job that they had their mind to do. And that ranges from electricians through to people who are researching with one of the big Danish pharmaceutical companies. They have got a culture which is different to ours. And I just wonder what thoughts you've had about getting the skills that employers need aligned with something that students might be interested in doing, getting the students to actually think differently, and then getting the colleges set up to actually meet that demand. What are you going to do differently than the Department of Education is basically the point.
Brilliant, and I agree with everything you said. What we're actually doing about it, where we have control of the funds directly, we're very clear, whether it be a college or an independent training provider, it has to go to something which gives a employer a skill for a specific vocational job. So best examples will be electric vehicle training, whatever. So we have tilted all of our education budget to try to do that. So more people are now at level 3, and there are more people clearly in the directly getting skills directly for the new job sectors. That's how we use the AEB. Now, there's some pushback on that, so we still have to do some things that are probably, if we didn't do it, would be criticised, like sort of English speakers of speakers of other languages. So there is still some requirement there, but we actively are pushing whatever cash we can in the way in which you say. Second thing we do is the whole sort of boot camp programme, and the idea here is which are the sectors that are growing fastest. How do we give people, and we pay for it, how do we give people the, I call them basic skills in this that gets them into work in a growing sector, digital being the best of that, and interesting what we pioneered is now being taken as national practice. And then the third element would be where we are doing a particular programme for a particular industry. And we actually work with a particular company around this. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this where, again, it's about getting people straight into employment. Best one, which I really love because people just think that's really interesting, was with your college, actually, in Solihull, where for the Commonwealth Games, we took the host broadcaster, who's a company called Sunset and Vine, who provided all the stuff for the BBC. 150 people went through a programme at Solihull College to get the skills for that broadcasting. And of course, they were used for the Games, but they've got it forever. So it's a bespoke piece that was designed for that. A bespoke piece is designed with HS2 at the Southend City College. A bespoke piece will be designed with Moda Living when they start on Great Charles Street. A bespoke piece is being designed with Brentwood. 3 examples. I don't know what in my brain I've forgotten it, so that's no good. Never mind. But you've got the point. So we all sorts of examples of where we try to put the funding we've got to specific job outcomes.
Councillor McCarthy.
I think the Mayor's already covered most of the questions I was going to ask, but what sort of view are we taking on market shaping, particularly for things like, I mean, there's going to be a lot of money coming into retrofit, and I'm quite keen that the golden thread is that it stays, much of that wealth stays in the area to improve the area and to give people the kind of skills that are going to inspire them and provide fulfilling work, which helps us in so many other areas, not the least of which is mental health.
I think I probably have. I think our active role is 2 things. First of all, the skills piece, and secondly, this is a hard thing to do, but I think we can play a role in it. The creation of predictable demand. One of the things that's holding this industry back, and I'd say exactly the same if we talk about modular construction, where some of the skills, not all, are similar, is that it's really lumpy because it's in its infancy. So if we can play a role through this, these community schemes, and actually we don't have turning on and turning off of individual government schemes to actually give sustainable demand, more small businesses, tradespeople will come into this. So I think there's 2 things we can do directly to shape the market there.
I think the key thing is it will give young people more confidence in their future, which will pull them through the education system from early school onwards.
And there's a really interesting thing going on. I've said we're putting these programmes on. They haven't been brilliantly subscribed. So what that is telling you, surprising yet, but what that is telling you is young people do not think there is yet good quality, sustainable employment. And that's why the demand issue has got to be addressed. So there is a role we can play. So if we can get this cash from government, that we're constantly then using it, not instead of, alongside other government schemes. That's what makes the market. Yeah.
Thank you. We're now just on 5 to 12, so we're nearly at the end of the Q&A. We had got 3 additional questions for you.
If you want,
well, I'm happy to put them in writing to you if you like, and you can respond to those.
Don't mind. Let's see how quick they are.
Right, okay. Well, one's from Councillor Kettle, so...
Oh, it'll be long.
Do you want to take the next? Take number 13, Councillor Kettle, allocation of skills funding.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Apologies, Andy, once again. We're on about the allocation of skills funding within the region. As Mayor, you have responsibility for all areas of the region. Therefore, do you think the process of used for the allocation of the adult education budget and other skills funding within the region is fair, or is there further work that needs to be done in the allocation of this devolved budget?
Yeah, very interesting. I do think it's fair, but I need to explain why. Because the way a lot of these budgets work, and we've just had this last Friday with leaders actually around UK shared prosperity funding, a lot of which will go to business support, some to community development piece and skills. It takes a mix of population and need. Now, that does tend to mean that per head of population, some areas, including yours, if you're very straightforward about it, would appear to be underfunded. But do I think that in these things you do have to have some consideration of need? I do, ultimately. And if you look at the concentration of unemployment as just one measure of need, it is very it's very different in different areas of the conurbation. So yes, I think it is right that we do reflect that, and it does lead to some areas per head of population being less well funded than others. And if you just take out an education budget, for example, I'll get this number wrong, but it won't change the essence of the answer. I think about 18 million of that goes to this English for speakers of other languages. That is inevitably concentrated in relatively big areas, but very concentrated. And it does lead to a skewing of the funding. But do I think that's appropriate? I do. I told you I would be honest.
We like honesty. Okay, so one very quick question, two quick questions then.
Yeah.
So one is around Commonwealth Games legacy.
Yes.
So it was a fantastic success, you know, and everybody who went to it, everybody has spoken so highly of the organisation and the whole experience. Yeah. And it's really important we have a well publicised plan to build on that legacy. Sure. Can you explain how the legacy planning has been going and how you expect residents of the region to benefit in the long term from hosting the games? And I think also bringing into that the legacy, the funding, the unspent funding that was left over.
Let me explain that, because that's new news, obviously. Because some of the legacy planning, frankly, it's been going on since we won the first right to host it. And obviously, it sounds glib, but it's true. Some of the legacy is the facilities that there are, and of course, brilliant work going on in Sandwell to make that a community asset going forward. Some of the legacy is the improvement in the infrastructure that we saw. That's there forever. Some of the legacy, that little example I've just given about the trainees at Sunset and Vine, they've got that job forever. It wasn't just, they've got that skill forever. It wasn't just for the games. But there is then this specific piece around the legacy funding. So the story goes that a brilliant job has been done by everyone to underspend the core budget, and we wouldn't be having this conversation if there hadn't been brilliant control of the budgets by everybody. It's about 70 million underspent. The announcement that was made at Conservative Party conference was that that money would be held in the region rather than it go back to Treasury, and that's brilliant. Now, where Laura was doing this only 8 days ago, was pressing government on exactly how we're going to get that money and what we will use it for. My expectation, not yet signed off with government, is it will be used in 3 ways. First of all, a chunk of it will go back to Birmingham City Council, and that's appropriate because they put in 25% of the cost of it, so they should have 25% of the underspend back. And what they do, that's for them to answer, not me. But of the money that is a regional contribution, i.e. the government's underspend, that will go on to 3 things, I expect. First of all, a chunk of it will go on following up all the business and tourism piece. We have that brilliant programme. We've got a fat list of inward investors that needs to be harvested, and that's for the benefit of everyone. If we can bring inward investors in, it's about jobs in the future. The second whole area will be the one that's, I think, most important, which is the whole issue of community engagement. And exactly how we structure the spending of the money there is still being debated. There is a proposal that there should be an independent charity like there was in London Spirit of 2012. That's still got to be formally agreed. And then the third area will probably be a fund for winning further big events to the region in the future. But that is my expectation. And to be really clear, Chair, that has not been formally agreed. But the money is there and that debate is live with government.
When are you expecting that to be formally agreed?
Imminent. I keep saying to Laura, have we had the letter yet? What is clear is that the government has taken the decision that we have this cash, but just we've got to go through the governance of it.
I mean, I think the big thing for me is around the community benefit from it, and how some of our underfunded, under-resourced community groups might be able to benefit from this in terms of investing in sport within the local areas.
And the read my lips moment on this, that doesn't just apply in Birmingham. This was a celebration that the whole West Midlands participated in, and I am determined that and here on smarting what I said about the other piece just earlier on, the whole of the region is able to benefit from it.
Absolutely. Thank you. And very final question then. So the Levelling Up Bill and future plans for PCC, fire and new constituency.
This definitely needs to be in writing.
Well, when I've asked it, if you wish to respond in writing, that is not a problem. So as the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill has highlighted the potential for the CA to assume the responsibilities of Police and Crime Commissioner and Fire Authority, what are your thoughts on that? And in addition, do you expect the CA to welcome any new constituent authorities by the time of the next mayoral election in 2024? And does sufficient capacity exist within the CA to do that?
So, I'm more than happy to answer, Chair, but I think I need to say something very, very clear at the beginning. Every question we've had so far, I have done as the mayor with the responsibilities that we described right at the beginning. Sort of, you might almost describe it as in a formal capacity. The questions you've just asked me are in a completely different category, and I have to give you my personal view as an individual, because I've been very clear as the sitting mayor, we will not at the CA board revisit, for example, the issues of PCC merger. So I've always respected that. I have a personal view on the matter, of course, which I'm prepared to give you, but we do need to understand I'm honouring what I said to the board, that I will not bring that back to the board under current legislation. Is that clear?
It is, and I think it's more about, the question is more about future legislation.
Yeah,
where it's about, it gives you the powers to assume rather than negotiate.
That's right. So if the legislation were to change, my personal view, but it would be after the next mayoral election, because I've been very clear we don't intend to change anything in this mayoral term. People voted for one thing, they expect it to stay. But if it was to change, and after the next session, if I was lucky to be in post, I would argue that there are benefits to be had from the two roles being combined. Okay. And then on the question you asked about new members, and Laura can confirm this, there is no current application for any new member. If there is, the process that we have at the moment is clear. If the legislation goes through, the process would change, but there is no application at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Mayor, and that brings us to the end of the session. Only slightly run over. So I don't know whether you have any closing comments. That
No, I'm exhausted, and I think enough. There we are. No, well, I will just say one thing, which is thank you, because I genuinely think it's been a wide-ranging conversation. I said at the beginning we hope all to learn. I think we've all done that. So thank you for the way it's been conducted.
Yeah, and just as chair, I'd like to thank yourself for the time out for your attendance. It is appreciated, and to the participation of all the members of the committee. So many thanks for that. Committee, we've just got to have a very short 10-15